There's a phone call I've been avoiding my entire life. Not from my father, though his voice echoes in it. Not from any person still breathing in this world. It's a call from the part of myself I buried so deep, I forgot it was still alive, still waiting, still hoping I'd finally pick up. You see, when we talk about the last conversation, we think about death, about final words with people we've lost. But there's another kind of last conversation, the one we need to have with the self we abandoned along the way, the self we sacrificed on the altar of everyone else's comfort. My father called me 3 months after he died. Not literally, though in my grief-addled state, I almost believed the phone was actually ringing. But the conversation was real, more real than any we'd had while he was alive. For 35 years, I perfected the art of emotional availability for everyone except myself. I became fluent in the language of other people's needs, while my own voice grew hoarse from whispering, "Do you know what it's like to be so attuned to everyone else's frequency that you forget your own signal even exists?" When my father was dying, I showed up every day. I held space for his fear, his anger, his regrets. I listened to stories I'd heard 100 times because I knew he needed to tell them. I fed him ice chips and adjusted his pillows and smiled when he needed me to smile. But I never told him I was angry. Angry that he'd taught me to disappear. Angry that our family's love language was silence punctuated by service. Angry that I learned to love by erasing myself and that he never once asked me to stop. This is what we don't talk about when we talk about grief. It's not just missing someone, it's grieving all the ways you disappeared for them. It's mourning the authentic self you never got to show them because you were too busy being who you thought they needed you to be. After the funeral, I became a ghost in my own life. People praised me for how strong I was, how well I was handling everything. What they didn't see was that I'd been handling everything for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to need handling myself. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from chronic self-abandonment. It's not just tiredness, it's a cellular emptiness, a spiritual anemia. You become so skilled at reading the room that you forget you're allowed to take up space in it. The phone call from my father, the one that wasn't real but was more true than anything, came on a Tuesday night. I was doing what I always did, taking care of everyone else's emotional weather while ignoring the storm system building in my own chest. "You're still doing it," his voice said through the static of my imagination. "You're still disappearing." And that's when I understood. The conversation I needed to have wasn't just with him, it was with every version of myself I'd abandoned in the name of keeping peace. Every time I said, "I'm fine," when I wasn't. Every boundary I didn't set because I was afraid of disappointing someone. Every dream I deferred because someone else's felt more urgent. Here's what they don't teach you in therapy. Sometimes you have to grieve yourself as if you've died, because in many ways, you have. The self you were before you learned that love meant self-erasure. That person needs a funeral too. I started having conversations with her, the girl I was at 7 before I learned that my feelings made other people uncomfortable. At 14, before I discovered that I could avoid conflict by simply agreeing with everyone. At 25, before I convinced myself that my needs were somehow less important than everyone else's. This is where the real grief lives. Not just in missing the dead, but in mourning the parts of ourselves we killed off to survive. The parts we sacrificed to stay connected, to avoid abandonment, to keep the peace. But here's the beautiful, terrible truth. You can't have a last conversation with someone who's still alive. And the self you abandoned, she's still breathing, wounded, yes, buried under years of people-pleasing and emotional contortion, absolutely, but alive. Solitude became my sanctuary. Not the lonely kind of alone, the rich, necessary aloneness that happens when you finally stop performing for an audience of ghosts. When you stop trying to earn love from people who are either dead or emotionally unavailable. I started small. I asked myself what I wanted for dinner instead of defaulting to what was easy or what others might prefer. I sat with my feelings without immediately trying to fix them or explain them away. I practiced saying no to my mirror until it stopped feeling like a foreign language. The phantom phone calls stopped, but real conversations began. With myself, with the parts of me that had been holding their breath for decades, waiting for permission to exist. This is what I want you to understand. The people who love you, truly love you, they don't need you to disappear. They need you to be real, messy, boundaried, human. Healing doesn't happen in the light. It happens in the cave of yourself, in the dark spaces you've been avoiding. It happens when you finally turn toward the pain instead of around it, when you stop medicating your emptiness with other people's approval. I learned that grief and love aren't opposites. They're dance partners. That you can miss someone and still refuse to abandon yourself for their memory. That the highest honor you can give the dead is to finally, fully, unapologetically live. The last conversation I had with my father wasn't about forgiveness. It was about recognition. Recognizing the patterns we both carried, the ways we both chose safety over authenticity, silence over truth, performance over presence. But the ongoing conversation I'm having with myself, that's about revolution. The quiet, persistent revolution of choosing yourself over and over until it becomes as natural as breathing. There comes a moment when you realize that all the people you've been trying so hard to keep, by diminishing yourself, by managing their emotions, by being endlessly available, they're going to stay or go based on their own capacity, not your performance. The freedom in that realization is breathtaking. Terrifying, yes, but breathtaking. So, I stopped picking up calls from my own anxiety about other people's opinions. I stopped responding to the phantom emergencies that used to pull me out of my own life. I started answering when my intuition called, when my body spoke, when my soul whispered that it was tired of being the supporting character in my own story. This is the conversation we're all avoiding, the one with ourselves, the one where we stop explaining and start existing, where we stop performing and start being, where we finally come home to who we were before the world taught us we weren't enough. My father never called again, but I hear from myself every day now. And that conversation, it's just beginning. The phone is ringing for you too. It's been ringing for years. Your authentic self is on the other line, holding space for every part of you that you've been too afraid to claim, waiting for you to stop being afraid of taking up space, of having needs, of being gloriously, imperfectly, courageously human. The last conversation you need to have isn't with anyone who's gone. It's with the person you've been waiting your whole life to become. She's still there, still waiting, still believing you'll finally pick up. The only question is, are you ready to answer?